Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi,
How are you today?
good, thank you. How are you all?
Yeah, we're doing well. I'm seeing nods and thumbs up and very excited to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
And
We will give people another minute or so if that's okay. I know that sometimes people pop in and then we will start our conversation. So we'll just
do
give
you,
it an
and given that, do you mind if I run across the room? Because I realize I left my notepad over
Oh, of
there.
course not.
I'll be right back. Hold on. I find that every call involves 5 more things I want to do. So it's good to have paper.
That's great. I have lots of notepads that I keep, and then I have to remember which one that I wrote my last note on. Keep a pile of them going. I see people hopping on, so that's fantastic. Give it just another like 20 seconds, and then we'll officially begin. So why don't we officially begin this meeting? Rebecca, we thank you so much for joining us, and Tammy for making the connection to have Rebecca be here today. That's fantastic. My name is Joanne Roberts, and I'm in my office. I'm the superintendent in the Lebanon School District. I think, Rebecca, I might have met you years ago when I was assistant superintendent over in Hanover, Norwich. So I'll make that connection back with you. And I am the consultant to help facilitate meetings focused on this very important issue. And what we usually do is go around and do introductions. So we'll do that today. Brenda, would you like to say hello?
Hi, I'm Brenda Metzler. I work with Let's Grow Kids as a community and program support specialist, and I've been part of this work group since its inception. Welcome, Rebecca.
Sunny?
I am Sunny Petras. I'm the director of the Dartmouth College Child Care Center. So I'm a New Hampshire representative, but being so close to the river, what happens in Vermont affects us here in New Hampshire as well. Welcome, Rebecca.
Damien? Would you like to say hello and introduce yourself?
Tammy Hazlitt, home provider in Thetford, and I've been doing this for 20 years now.
Michael?
Good afternoon. I'm Michael Bennett. I'm a program officer with the Couch Family Foundation.
Damien?
Hello, I'm Amy Brooks. I'm the Executive Director of the Early Care and Education Association based in the Upper Valley, and welcome.
Jesse?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessie Rady. I'm a program officer with the Couch Family Foundation.
Emily?
Hi, I'm Emily Tenenbaum. I am a senior leader at Let's Grow Kids, a parent advocate, and also grew up in the Upper Valley. So this is one of my favorite groups I get to work with.
Hi, John?
Hi, I'm John Drew, work at Vital Communities and work with Joanne on the ECE project. Thank you for being here, Rebecca.
Hi, Rachel?
Hi, I'm Rachel Williams, and I am the program supervisor for the Child Care Financial Assistance and Referral Program at the Family Place in Norwich.
And Damien, can you hear me? to do an introduction?
Yes, I can. You're breaking up a little bit, but I can. Again, I'm Damian DiNicola. I'm on the board of Vital Communities. I'm also the chair of the board of the Green Mountain Economic Development Corporation, and been involved with a child care group here in Randolph, where I live and work as an attorney for a number of years as well. And they're all tied together with a project we're working on down here.
Terrific. Well, I'm so glad everyone could be here today. And Rebecca, would you like to do an introduction?
Sure. I'm Rebecca Holcomb, and I have lived and worked in this area for years. I helped start the Rivendell School District years and years ago, and have been everything from a teacher to a district leader to Secretary of Education. This is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. Like some of you, I know I wouldn't be where I was had there not been care for my mother, first and foremost, under the Lanham Act years and years and years ago, and also for myself. I attended a Head Start when I was a child and benefited from the kinds of wraparound services that program was able to provide. I am pleased to represent the towns of Norwich, Sharon, Stratford, and Thetford in the legislature. I don't know yet what committee I'll be on, but I do know that there will be quite a bit of discussion around early care and learning in the next couple of years. I don't want to go through all the details of the child care report. I think that was the first issue you'd wanted to discuss in Norwich. But what I can say is that I've shared the link, and I hope you'll read it if you have further questions. But it's very clear to me that we have a system that's broken, and we know what some of the reasons are that it's broken. I think one of them is clearly we are going to need significant investment in this sector to make it a functioning and viable sector for families and parents. I'm also very concerned about the fact that increasingly, nobody's obligated to provide seats to children, and it's very difficult sometimes for providers to take that risk of expanding supply. So we were very excited about the Randolph project and as a model of what we can do. But also we're very aware that increasingly in this pretty tough market, providers are also in competition with each other for providers, for early childhood educators. And one of the reasons that the Norwich Child Care Committee was so committed to tapping the brakes was it was very clear that if we started to subsidize local child cares to raise salaries, that we would literally suck the talent from surrounding towns into Norwich. So it was becoming very zero sum. And that really, to me, reinforced the idea that the child care solutions that we need as a state aren't always just local, that the state level policy landscape is going to have to be a solution or a part of that solution as well. Or we're just fighting for crumbs, but we're not actually solving the problem of creating new supply and new opportunity and stabilizing the providers who work so hard to care for our kids. And then the other issues that just came out of that study that I hope we can talk about, in addition to stabilizing providers and figuring out ways to make sure that they can expand, but also treat their teachers well. And I call them teachers because we need to respect and value the skill that they bring. I would like to think about in the legislature whether some of the ways former policy has worked has created unintended consequences that perhaps have created hardship, but also are amplifying some of the inequality we see statewide. Our area, we've lost all our home providers. One of the consequences of losing home providers is that they often have the more flexible schedules, and that is disproportionately going to affect some of the lower wage workers in our communities. There's some evidence at the state level that the way we fund may also amplify or redistribute resources to communities that are already better resourced to help support providers. And I'm particularly worried about some of our more rural communities and whether people who aren't in large communities are going to be able to continue to provide and support the kind of quality care. So those are just some of the issues I've been thinking about, but really hope to use today. I'm incredibly grateful to Tammy, who gave me a tremendous amount of time and talked about some of the challenges that she saw, but also some of the opportunities that exist in terms of shared services and thinking collaboratively in a regional way to try to provide some support for our providers. I'd really like to take this opportunity to hear from you, you're on the ground, what you feel are the pinch points and what you feel are the opportunities to move forward.
I'm seeing lots of head nods as you're speaking, Rebecca. A lot of people are great in alignment and agreement with what you were sharing. Is there anyone who'd like to kind of share their thoughts about how to support the ECE work, or your own kind of background to share with Rebecca? And then just feel free to operate in, unmute yourself, and go ahead. So why don't we start with perhaps Amy? We've talked a bit about your workforce recruitment, trying to get people into the pipeline. Maybe could you talk a little bit about that, and perhaps how that could connect with the state level work that Rebecca is going to be doing?
Sure. So, Rebecca, we talked or conversed in the symposium last year. So the Early Care and Education Association is a nonprofit that supports licensed family-based and center-based childcare in the greater Upper Valley region. And we do that through a couple of main points, networking, some shared service efforts through training, and also really trying to kind of solve this recruiting and retention issue. And basically what we've learned over the past 3 years, we've really kind of knuckled down into the recruiting piece, is there are people interested in the field, but they're either not coming in, the pathway into the field is not working, or they're coming into the field and they're kind of hitting a dead end. So what we've actually found is we're finding people that are interested, they're interviewing, and they're not being hired in some cases, because what we really need is we need qualified people. We can't just be run by all, new people to the field. In order to open classrooms, we need competent, already trained people. So it's really, there are a lot of programs after hire, apprenticeships and a lot of workforce training programs, but the support to get to the point of being hired is where we are. So we found two strains of people. We found, or categories of people. We found people that are currently working, retail or in the hospitality business, and they really can't afford to jump into a field that they don't know much about. And so they need a lot of flexibility in coming into the field and a lot of support. And then we have a group of people that are not currently in the workforce, and they also need a ton of flexibility and support in making the transition back into the workforce. And then we actually found a small group of people that did not graduate in 2020, 2021, 2022. So we're finding this pod of people that are without a high school diploma, which is also a barrier. So the solution, or one of the, our workforce strategy is basically highlighting that group of people, really meeting the needs of those people and navigating the barriers with them, so that at the end of a 6 to 7 month program, they come out with work experience. They come out, we're utilizing the Vermont Links subpool system. We're training mentors. We're training lead teachers that are already in the field to be mentors. So raising the skills of our incumbent workforce is part of the strategy, and working to build in some compensation in there through stipends to kind of attract people to the field, and also to try to hold on to our mentor staff, our lead teacher staff that are already doing onboarding with 0 adult learning theory training. So, and an overloaded work schedule. So that's one thing, one piece that we could use some help with. We could use some help, launching and funding this idea. It's a very innovative idea that hasn't been tried as far as, I think of, pipeline. This is like the catch basin of workforce building. It's not, they're not in the pipeline yet. We're trying to get them into the pipeline. And another piece I'd like to kind of let you know about is a project that's happening in Coos County, New Hampshire, that you might be interested in learning more about. But anything else about the workforce strategy, Joanne, that you wanted to highlight? Or
No, as always, you did a really great job of summarizing it. One of the connections I had was recently in Manchester School District. They had a large career fair, and it was actually created by 2 female students who didn't feel as though they're getting the same attention as other students when they went to career fairs. And with your background in education, Rebecca, I'm wondering if we could tap somehow school districts and get the career fair. We know that students really need to start thinking about this, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade. It was another thought when I was reading the paper as a means to get students interested in it. Vermont does a lot of hands-on kind of experiential work that counts toward high school graduation, which is fabulous. So is there a way that we could kind of put a spotlight on early childhood education for all students who might be interested in it, and maybe connect them with centers that are local or something like that too? But I know Amy and Michael have worked a lot on that concept of the pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, two obvious connections to think about in your conversations with school districts. One are some CTEs, the career and tech centers, do have programs in human services and do train people to go into the early care and learning sector. Another one, I think you were referring to Act 77, which is a law that in Vermont, which allows for flexible pathways and provides describes a series of tools that are opportunities for students to engage in learning that aren't traditional classroom settings. And one of those is work-based learning, and trying to tie that to the early care and learning sector would be a really powerful way to do that. It would let a child who is in high school, spend part of their day perhaps and do a project in the context of an early child care setting to try to both expose them, but also perhaps teach them something about small business management, early child development, things like that, that you would be well prepared to support, but that would be essential sort of introduction to what it actually means to run a child care program. So there's great opportunities there for that kind of continued partnership. This issue of workforce is one that really is a struggle for the state right now. And I was struck at the symposium this fall when somebody basically talked about feeling like she was losing money by working in a childcare because the salary was low and the cost of living was so significant. And I would suspect that for most people who are still persisting in this sector, I have deep gratitude, and it is a mission, because it is not a place you go if you want to make money and be rich. It just isn't right now. And one of the things that was so painful to listen to was in some of the visits that I did was childcare provider after childcare provider saying, I decided I couldn't stay in the profession because I couldn't afford to. And one of the other strategies that I think we can explore is looking at other, where else do people have discretionary control over their family budgets? And we know that part of the reason childcare is so unaffordable is also because the housing market is so out of whack. We don't have enough people in state currently to do this work. We can try to tap these under-tapped and underutilized pools, but some of those people are choosing not to work for economic good reasons, and we need to figure out what those are and undo them. I've talked to people who are very concerned about the benefits cliff. If you earn too much, you actually end up having less household income. Many childcare workers are right at that threshold, and that's a real problem for us. It's one we should be able to tackle and try to get headway on. We need a wartime mobilization around housing, because increasing the supply of housing would reduce the need to pay these extortionate rates that people are compelled to pay now if they want to live and work in our communities. And that would make it easier to recruit people as well. But I also think that we have to be thinking about strategies for funding childcare that also are tied directly to raising the wages of childcare workers. And the story I'll just offer back is one that we heard where a private provider lost a teacher to a private family who hired the person as a nanny, because it was cheaper to hire the qualified teacher as a nanny than it was to put their children into childcare. If you can't think, I can't think of a better metric of how screwed up this market is right now. I mean, to me, that's the story I tell people when they say, what do you mean it's screwed up? I mean, that's, if that continues, every family who hires a childcare teacher as a nanny is, 5 to 14 other families that have now lost care. But that's what this market supports right now. And so I do think that part of, we haven't seen that increasing subsidies expand supply or necessarily raises wages. So we need to be thinking about how we fund in ways that actually do increase supply and also raise wages so that people are paid fairly and incentivized to stay, to learn more, to become the professionals that we know we need to have to take care of our children. So I don't know if that's quite what you were looking for, Amy, but I just feel very strongly that trying to recruit people already here is not enough. We need to make this a profession that people can thrive in.
Yes, and thank you, because that's the work of that level. We're
You're trying to survive.
This isn't we're trying to kind of solve the problems locally and kind of solve some issues for in barriers for people that are actually fall within the cliff and kind of that specific need. But the big picture issue is your level.
Yeah.
So,
and it's hard to know. I mean, I remember sitting in a hearing when 166 was being rolled out, and there was a period in the middle of it where alternately somebody spoke who ran a program for 0 to 5-year-olds and talked about how losing 3 to 5-year-olds to preschool had broken their business model and basically put them out of business. So there was no more care for 0 to 3-year-olds, followed by people who were thrilled that they could open a preschool program that only operated 10 hours a week. And so part of it is how do we think coherently about this as a sector to preserve a business model that works for families, works for children, and works for providers as well. And I think the more we parcel it out, the greater the risk that we're creating unintended consequences. It was not lost on me that when we rolled out pre-K, we spent about 60 to 80 million more dollars. And we also lost in the same window, in part due to regulations, but also due to the incentives, about 7% of the total care in the state. And that was disproportionately concentrated in the 0 to 3 providers. And I say that because I think that it was well-intentioned. And I think we also still have work to do, because when that is set in place, it gives people at the local level fewer tools to maintain and protect the kind of services that our families say they need.
Rebecca, one of the words you used is parcel it out. And
I'm sorry, I missed you there for a bit.
In listening, sorry, our internet's not great here today. My experience in listening to a lot of folks is trying to find one avenue to get into the profession, to have help and support in this profession. And the concept was to have one department in Vermont that kind of specifies itself to be the umbrella for everything and all things ECE. I think that's a possibility in Vermont, the way that the systems are set up, so that there is one department that might be able to help everybody out.
I think there could be real virtue in it. I mean, one of the things that I think there are some things that are truly different. I mean, one of the things I talk about a lot when I talk to people is the 2-generation model that you see at the family place. because particularly some of our most challenged families, they really need a 2-generation approach for ECE. And so I think there are things that are different about early care and learning and K-12 education, but K-12 has a very strong investment and need for strong ECE, because when children are well cared for, particularly in those critical years prior to school, they enter school ready to learn. And for years, particularly with students with disabilities or developmental delays, schools in federal law are tasked with some of the financial responsibility for that, in part to make sure schools are invested in and maintain that commitment to early care and learning. And so I say that to say, yes, absolutely, I think a one department solution could be effective. I did not think the recent report was that constructive, because it still doesn't look at the structural problems that create challenges between these sectors. And so simply creating a third financially starved agency, in addition to 2 existing financially starved agencies, to try to do what wasn't done before, simply fragments the problem even more. Many of the structural challenges between the field of education and the field of early childhood education right now have their roots in federal law and federal rules and regulation, and state law and state rules and regulation. So it's 4 sets of statute and 4 sets of rules which conflict. And so whether or not you're 2 agencies or 1 agency, you still have to do that work to reconcile the logic models of different federal funding streams and state funding streams, each of which comes with its own statutory dependencies. I think one of the most publicly visible examples of this was the fingerprinting challenges around pre-K when it first rolled out. And for over a year and a half, we had been saying to CDD, there's going to be a fingerprinting problem. There's going to be a fingerprinting problem. And that's because in the education statute in Title 16, someone like Joanne could lose her license if she doesn't personally ensure that every single child, early educator who touches one of her district students was fingerprinted. So there was no way superintendents could legally authorize those patients until they personally had those fingerprints in hand. And that's absurd from a policy point of view, because many of our districts touch 10, 14, 20 different childcare providers. So some people, and many of our childcare providers work with 11 or 12 districts, which means everybody, the way the law was written, would have to get fingerprinted 11, 12 times, which is absurd. And part of it is we have to stop pretending that there are statutory conflicts, and we have to start working through what those conflicts are to make sure that we can get to a rationalized system that makes sense and is minimally burdensome to achieve the stated policy goals. And those differences aren't going to go away. With one agency, they still have to be willing to work those out. And another challenge, I think, in these 2 sectors, I've spoken, with some of the folks from the Couch Foundation about this, is that when you enroll in kindergarten, your school will make a spot for you. They will open the doors to and guarantee that somewhere you have a spot. If you come to a school district for pre-kindergarten, they are under no obligation to provide you a spot. If they come to one of you, parents, a parent comes to one of you, if you're full, you are not obligated to offer that parent a spot. And currently you don't. We know that there's not enough supply in the state to meet the demand. It is not a public good in statute, whether you think it should be or not. In statute, it is not. And that's a very different logic model than what we have in public education. And so part of the dissonance in expectation has to do with that. And then the other logic is, how do you handle the third issue that is going to be an issue that has to be discussed and managed is, how do we handle students who are for whatever reason, more challenging to support and educate, who maybe has significant emotional disturbance or are eligible for support services for disabilities. And, this is a statewide challenge, but a single child with extreme needs could be very, very distorting on a small program. There's often interest in having them in a larger center-based program or a school program, but figuring out how we make sure that there is a space for the students who are the most vulnerable and the most marginalized in the state has to be part of that conversation. And there isn't really always a clear mechanism for supporting that right now. So I say that to say that it's not that we couldn't unite this under one agency. My personal preference is to pick one and make it happen, because I think setting up a third agency, we already know that no one is funded. Why would you spend the money on yet a third agency when the current agencies aren't adequately funded? And what we want to be doing is putting our money into direct service in the field and not into more administrative overhead at the state level. And no matter which one we choose, we're still going to have to address those same issues of conflicting federal and state statute and rules, and challenges around the different logics of the two sectors and how we reconcile them, and issues around how we ensure equitable access, which is in other settings and other nations that manage or propose to fund early care and learning at scale. There's a market manager. Vermont does not have a market manager for this sector. And that makes it difficult to make sure the dollars go where and for what purpose. I think some of the providers I've heard say they need to go. Did that make sense? Happy to elaborate if it didn't. I just don't think it's a silver bullet. The problems will still be there.
That makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate that explanation. All of your background experience all kind of flows together, doesn't it, when you're having this kind of conversation? I'm going to pause and have anybody who wants to ask Rebecca a question or want to add more information about the topic that we just talked about before heading into a little bit about the key things that were found through the Norwich report. Anybody have something they want to share before we move on? I'm also cognizant of time. It's heading toward 1:05, so just so people know. I'm not seeing anyone's hands raised. Could you give us an idea? Oh, great. Damien?
Yeah, but I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the funding side of it, because I think it ties into the conversation. I mean, one of the things that I think that's getting highlighted here is the need to a childcare specific approach, whether it's through a new agency, through a similar agency, the need to really focus on the fact that the needs for this industry are really different than other industries. It's the typical supply and demand model that we use coming from an economic development sector just doesn't work when you have a system in this state. You have a system where there's plenty of demand, no supply. You have a tendency of folks in the legislature are used to dealing with businesses to say, well, just create a business model. And then because there's so much demand out there, it should be able to work. That doesn't work because the system is in such a state of disrepair right now that you need to fix too many things at once. So the focus needs to be on how do we put the things in place and the funding sources, one that will work for the industry the way it is now, and will sustain it long enough where we work to fix the problems. And part of that is realizing that things like the type of things that we keep running into with our project, the typical things like requiring reimbursement. And this came up with, the issue with some of the payments to maintain employees for other folks as well. In a typical economic development model, requiring reimbursement and requiring matching funds makes sense. It doesn't work in childcare funding. So even some of the typical funding sources that should be out there right now would be out there for other industries or nonprofits, don't work in these sectors. So we need to recognize that, fix those problems, and then realize that you really need a sustainable approach, like an incubator, like a startup, where you're going to have a system to fund from the startup through sustaining it to the point where there's self-sufficiency while we work out the supply chain problems and other issues. You can't have a supply chain if you don't have centers in place for those folks to work at. If you don't have the salaries in place that can pay them a living wage, yet without the employees, you can't have those centers. So as from a typical business model, you can't make it work unless you're willing to fund it for long enough to get to the point where you can fix some of these issues and be self-sustaining. And just the last point, because we're short on time, is to urge folks to really change to looking at kind of a reverse approach to developing these models, where we start by focusing on what is a business model that will work. And what's a business model that will pay people a living wage, that will attract the teachers? What does that business model look like? And then develop a system around supporting that model, rather than the typical approach which we have now is saying, well, gee, if we can find a way to get more money into the system, then we'll let people develop the models, and then hopefully somebody will come up with a model that works.
Yeah, I would just offer, and one of the things that we were aware of is there are a lot of certified early childhood educators. They just all work in grades 1 through 3. And the problem that I think this sector is going to continue to have until there are higher wages in this sector is that people will move into those, pre-K through 3 jobs that pay teacher wages with healthcare when they can, because people, providers are people too, and they have kids and they want to raise their families well and take care of them. And so I think, I guess I would just put back to you, I don't think markets can solve the problems that markets created. I think what I hear, I don't actually think we have an early care system. I think we have an early care sector, and they're fundamentally different. If the state decides it wants a system, I think it means a different way of managing the system at the state level, to provide stability, predictability, and revenue, so you can take the risk of expanding. You mentioned the system of reimbursement, but it's not in the state's interest to short-term subsidize that teacher if they're going to move to 2nd grade the minute the subsidy ends. We need sustainable solutions, not one-offs that aren't going to lead to a real solution. And I guess I just learned so viscerally that if we don't think about the continuum from birth to 5, we're gonna disconnect the older children from the younger children, and it makes that service of those younger children almost impossible. In nationwide, we have chosen to, in this sector, in this market delivery model, what we've chosen to prioritize is efficiency, but there's also a cost and equity that comes with that. And, one of the reasons I mentioned the home providers early, a lot of people say, well, they're less well educated or they're less well regulated. The reality is they also have flexible hours for the people who work the 2nd shift. And sometimes, there's now a growing body of research, especially coming out of the Civil Rights Project, that suggests that even the way we evaluate quality in some of our providers may be biased in ways that reduce the revenues that are available to providers who tend to serve people in less advantaged communities. And so I think we all have to be humble about when we say a model that works, because the reality of a system is that it for the parent who hired the provider to take care of her 3 kids, the system works perfectly. She is a fantastic certified early childhood educator taking care of her 3 kids, and she's got a 1-to-3 ratio. That's not a solution for the state, because her success came at the harm of a provider. And we don't have a way to manage that right now in the state.
Rachel, did you want to talk a little bit about what you're seeing at the family base?
Sorry, I lost my headphone. In that, do you mean as far as the subsidy goes, or are you referring to the childcare? I just wanted to.
Yeah. Anything you'd want to contribute to the conversation that you think would be helpful for Rebecca to know?
I think it seems like the group is fairly aware, and it was highlighted really well, the issues with the subsidy program that are going on. I do know at the state level, there is the constant question too of, because the subsidy and all, early childhood, it fits in 2 different areas, where it's the education versus and the economic. And there's the child development division that kind of sits in between those both. And the question is, constantly where this should be, which one of those should it be placed into? Does this need to go more automated like EBT is, or is this going to continue on as a question of is early education? So I think it is aware, good for everybody to be aware that at the state level, there is a real desire by legislature to put the current subsidy that we have in one of those two boxes. And I think in the future that this group, or at least members of this group, will be needed to help design that or give input in on that. Because eventually it is going to have to go in one or the other box. That's just the way it looks. But yeah, the program is very broken and gotten even more so with the new system. Does anybody have any questions about how it currently functions? Or I was more hoping to give input, if anything.
I can give you a good news story about the family place.
Oh, yeah.
Like. I think you may have seen it. But when I was door knocking, I met a woman who had never voted. We were targeting people who were not voters. And she described she was struggling. She had been struggling with addiction and came to the family place and was supported by the family place, including getting access to medication-assisted treatment. She's now been free of treatment and free of substances for over a year, and like almost broke down in tears talking about the family place. And she has 4 kids and is employed and just bought her first home. And that 2-generation approach, the programs that stabilize the parent to stabilize the child. I just thought, I hope you could hear what people say about you, because it really does make a difference. And I know sometimes people don't come back and tell you. I don't want to give you bad news. There is one other issue, which is probably not on the radar of this sector, but could spill from K-12, as many of these issues sometimes do. And you may have been noticing in the paper a lot of the litigation in the last 6 years around use of vouchers in religious schools in the state of Vermont. But a larger issue is the use of public education dollars in schools that really have a private purpose. In other words, they might be curating enrollment, using test scores, discipline records, grades to decide who they serve. And there is a growing sentiment that this is not consistent with the Common Benefits Clause of the Vermont Constitution. And I think the recent decisions may be the straw that broke the camel's back. And the reason I raise this is some of the same institutions that have been so controversial in the K-12 sector are also institutions that provide early care and learning. And that constitutional question may spill over to this sector as well. So just putting that on your radar.
Yeah, I could
come your way.
Definitely see something that comes our way, because essentially what the subsidy is as long as you're a licensed provider, you can qualify and apply for the subsidy. And that's to work with children all the way to age 12, as well as children with qualifying health needs up to age 19 for additional care. So that
and
I'm kind of surprised it's never come. But.
Well, I think people have been waiting for the K-12 lawsuits to play out. It will also probably affect after school programming as well, especially because the Scott administration decided to run the after school programming through Vermont After School and not through the Agency of Education. The challenge they now have is that we're delivering that to programs that don't serve kids with disabilities, that don't provide transportation, don't provide support for kids who are economically disadvantaged, and some of them are very, very religious in nature. And so all of those, that palette of multiple reasons constitute private benefits. And I think particularly as the funding formula changes, the town of Thetford is looking at possibly a 25 to 30%, 30-cent increase on its tax rate over the next 5 years. People are going to start to push back on what they perceive as public subsidy of private purposes. And I don't know how that will affect this sector, but I given the contentiousness in the K-12 sector, I can't see it coming back to this sector as well. And the Supreme Court has made very clear that when public services are delivered through private providers, you can't exclude any private provider.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important to keep on the radar.
Anyone want to add to the topics that we've been talking about so far? We mentioned a little bit about the Norwich report, and I wondered if there's actionable outcomes from that work that you did in Norwich that you could share with us and possibly you could learn from.
Yeah, I would encourage, I mean, I think I shared the link and hopefully you can share it with others on the call. It's the sections are short and in the back, and I could pull them up and read them for you. But I think the first one was actually paid family leave, because parents need it. That makes parents possible. I worked in a school and I remember how kids all of a sudden showed up with headaches, at 1 o'clock after lunch because their Tylenol had worn off. And I think one of the lessons of COVID is we need parents to be able to stay home with their children and not lose income when their children are sick. And that protects their child, but it also frankly protects our providers and it protects the other children in the program. So I think paid family leave was a strong takeaway that benefited everybody in this context and keeps all of us safe and healthy. There were a number of others. I think there were some opportunities we explored in terms of whether or not at a regional level or a municipal level, grants could be used so that we would contract with providers or a community of providers and say, we're going to send you 10 kids. And I know you only have capacity to 5, so we're going to give you X amount of money to try to expand and hire or guarantee slots so that people could have a predictable revenue source enough to take that financial risk to make that commitment to service, and also possibly making it contingent on serving diverse students. It's pretty clear within just the providers in our own ecosystem. There's some that serve many students who are disadvantaged. There's some who serve no students who are disadvantaged. And that is something we ought to be asking questions about, particularly if we know the research on early care and learning and how parents benefit from being part of inclusive communities and building those networks. So I think that there's some learning there in terms of how we could sweeten the pot or incentivize, access for some of the students who might be a little bit harder to educate or might need some more support, and contracting for those particular slices, because it seems like this sector is more segregated than the K-12 sector. So there were some learnings there. And then a lot of it was around the need for significant investment and the need to think regionally. We were very aware that if we supported higher wages in a local provider in a way that in a place where essentially providers are competing with other providers for educators that are making it possible to hire people at a higher wage in Norwich, could effectively incentivize people to leave the providers they were currently working in other communities. And that was a zero-sum community solution or outcome that we didn't feel benefited the broader community. So our plea to the legislature was to help figure out a way to make this a state issue or a regional issue so that communities and providers aren't stuck in sort of zero-sum competition with each other, that it's in all of our interests to be in a more collaborative landscape that ensures stability and support for families and providers. I think those are some of the high-level takeaways.
Joanna, I was just going to jump in really quick. I'm just enjoying listening, but just that point is just awesome. Like in terms of that last point, Rebecca, what we're hearing regionally, not just in the Upper Valley, but across the state, is that yes, we can, and it's probably because of the broken system that we're looking at, that the investment at the state level is really going to be needed. And I think people have heard that kind of loud and clear. And I know that there's been lots of different pushes. And I know, Damien, you just referred to making sure we kind of have the public funding to a system that is otherwise not able to function in the market that we have. So I'm excited for this coming session. I think there's like a huge bill in Vermont that's going to be moving, and I'm really excited. And I think kind of talks about all the different pillars that we had talked about today. And I know there's going to be a lot of different opportunities as you move forward as a new legislator to hear and listen. And yet there's also a lot of other issues that are going to be on your plate. And just interested to understand from you how you would like to hear from this committee, how you want to hear from constituents, how we want to engage with you, knowing that you're going back and forth. Things will be really busy because we are really excited to finally have a lot of the consensus around it needing to be a statewide solution, and that each region is kind of saying like, yes, there are lots of things in play, and what we really need is fixed at the state level. So I really appreciated what you just said about it. Just one little note about the incentivizing and how that's not an equitable way to kind of approach the situation, and we hear that across the state. So I'm just excited for this session. I'm excited to work with all the new legislators, the incumbents, and really find a way that we can kind of communicate and work with you all best, knowing how busy you are and that you are a citizen legislature and not, you got a lot on your plate. So would love to hear from you on that as well. Maybe not right now, but when it's appropriate.
Well, one of the reasons I was thrilled when Tammy reached out was that one of the things that I've learned is that when a bill looks really amazing in Montpelier, sometimes it doesn't work so well locally. And I think I wish Act 166 would have been shopped to providers before it had been passed. I mean, I really do, because I think there were things in there that I've heard providers say were amazing. And there are things in there I've heard providers say were really kind of challenging. And I think thinking through some of those experiences from the pure point of view of the people who are actually trying to run the programs would be really helpful. So being able to get feedback from people, as that bill develops about what works and what doesn't work is helpful, because again, it can look great, but it might not be filling. And we need to make sure that we're paying attention to all the voices on that. It is helpful to the extent I can work with groups. That's very powerful because there's not enough hours in the day to meet with everybody one-on-one. I'm just going to be blunt. I mean, I was amazed, just in the last 2 weeks, the sheer volume of requests. There is just no way to meet with everybody individually who's asking, and much as I would love to, there just aren't enough hours in the day. So this is a great opportunity. And that's why when Tammy mentioned it, I was so excited, because this is an existing body of people who have engaged deeply with the issues, who represent diverse experience, who may be able to offer that and bring that richness of perspective to the kinds of conversations we're having at the state level. That's very, very powerful. So that's one way. My cat is trying to add comments, so I'm sorry if you hear it. So.
Thank you. That's really helpful, and why I appreciate this group so much. It's not just because I'm from the Upper Valley, but because of the way they've organized and really come together to kind of think about this issue really holistically in a way that we're going to be able to kind of have these issues at one place. And I agree. It's like it's much easier when there's a group and then we've all kind of built consensus around things. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, and it's also just insight. I mean, one of the things, Tammy, I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, so I'm ready for you to jump in and tell me to shut up at any time. One of the things that just struck me is there are things that are, one of the challenges that a lot of early care and learning programs have that is an issue for some schools, but not all schools, is scale. And there are some services that are best supported at scale. Professional development is one of those. It can be customized to local sites, but it doesn't make sense. It's just not as efficient to have that done on a one-off program by program if what you're looking for is comparable services, or if there's a way to provide it at scale in a more cost-effective way that's still responsive to your local needs. So again, part of it is, that we have a lot of federal money right now. We got more federal money than any other state except for New York on a per capita basis. Some of this is going to start drying up next year. We have to be, our point in education was you can't have a 27 course buffet and expect to pay $3 for it. So we're going to have to figure out what are the most important things that we can do for this sector that really make a difference, that really impact your ability to provide care and support you and stabilize you. And this is about it's about what we have to do versus, in a perfect world, what we'd like to do. And I remember being on the Blue Ribbon Committee years ago, and somebody, I won't mention names, but was talking about how we needed $50,000 per child 0 to 3. And I said, yeah, in a perfect world, we do that, but get real. It isn't going to happen. So what is going to happen? What is viable? And my hope is that we can learn from your experience about, what are the things that are the enabling things that let you do good work. And let's focus on then those first, and then we can get to the next stuff, because you know, I mean, every day there's another story of collapsing infrastructure. Just in my 4 towns, there's 3 bridge projects that people are upset with, each of which is $30 to $40 million. You can get the drift. I mean, everyone says, oh, you've got a supermajority, the sky's the limit. That is not the case. So we need your help to stay laser focused on why this is important, why this is part of the workforce solution, and why this isn't going to happen unless we find a way to support our providers and our educators at this level, or they're just going to go into K-12 or something else, and it just won't be there. So we need your help on that. Rachel, you had your hand up.
Great.
I'm sorry, I was tending to something else and accidentally hit my mouse.
Okay.
Any other feedback or input before we end our meeting today?
Just one quick point, just jumping off of the bridge infrastructure analysis. I mean, one thing to continue to emphasize and maintain focus on is this. We're at a point like with those bridges where you can't just look at this as a deferred maintenance approach where we just do the minimum necessary. Eventually, you've got to replace the bridge, and you've got to have an extra capital expenditures now in order to have a system where you're not bleeding to death over the future and spending more, you know, over the 20-30 year term. So it's changing the focus to childcare in that view, something where we're going to need to have extra dollars to put in now if you want to save money in the long term, both from an economic development standpoint because of the impacts it has for businesses in the state and for the programs themselves. I think that there is a sustainable model out there that can be developed that will be self-sustaining at some point, but that can't happen unless you put in the extra dollars and time to figure out what it looks like, and then also fund it now and support it till it can be self-sustaining. Which is one of the things that we're trying to focus on with ours. It's starting with this is what we need to pay folks to attract folks to the sectors, not to lose them to the schools. Here's the scale of a program that we need to do that. Here are the other areas where we need support. And now how do we fund this in a way till it gets to the point where it can work?
Yeah, and Damien, you're preaching to the choir. I mean, I think this is incredibly important. And the reason I'm being cautious is I've never seen a successful model on the scale that's being contemplated that doesn't involve some management of that market. If you look at the countries that do this effectively, there is a market management mechanism, and nothing I've seen yet in Vermont is proposing that. And the reason I'm just offering that caution is my experience with 166 is that adding money alone may not be enough. We may need to think about how we do this and how we manage a mixed delivery system that really protects the care that we know we need to have, because markets tend to sort and segregate. That's what they do very well, but it could have perverse consequences that people weren't anticipating. And I think we've seen that in the past. So I want to make sure we do this right, so it's a viable and stable system. And that may mean, if we're going to make the investment that we should make in it, and that I think will pay for itself eventually, we need to be doing it with an eye to how we manage those resources. And then I think the other competition you're going to run into, I think actually the biggest threat to a childcare bill right now is the housing bill, because you can pay for childcare, but if people can't afford to live here, we still have the same problem. And so I think this is a time when the state is going to have to learn how to chew gum and walk at the same time, you know. And I'm a big, I mean, I know everyone's terrified of debt and the bond rating. You know, I know I run a business. I know if you have an inn, in my case, and you don't put sheets on the bed, you will not have business. And I know we've got to have housing, or there will not be people here paying income taxes, and there won't be families here, because the market is so stuck right now that many of the people who can't move to the state are younger people who would be entering for workforce reasons who just can't find a place to live. And the people leaving the state tend to be people earning between $50,000 and about $100,000 a year. That's our workforce. I don't think there's a workforce solution that doesn't involve housing, and I don't think we can train our way out of this problem. We need housing and we need childcare. And we're going to have to figure out how to find some balance to do both. And we've grossly underinvested in both those sectors. Want to be clear about that.
Tammy, I want to thank you for making the introduction with Rebecca. And Rebecca, we are so grateful for your time today. One of the things we want you to know is that today we have a representative group of people. We have literally, I'm thinking in my head, 45 plus when we're looking at parents and teachers and businesses and others who are part of this initiative. So I definitely want you to know that we're here as a resource for you and would love to continue to connect and just to make this happen. So we greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. And I just threw my email into the chat, and anybody should feel free to reach out to me if you want to follow up. If there's something you want to talk to me about, you don't agree, feel free to reach out, and I would welcome your feedback. And we used to sit at the state and just argue about how to make things work. These issues are so complicated. You are in one of the most complicated sectors in the state, and it's not always obvious what the path forward is. So I really welcome your input in finding that path. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. We don't have any other agenda items, so we're going to end our meeting as well as when you leave. And sincerely wish you all the best in this role. Thank
And
you.
don't hesitate to
Take
reach
care,
out.
everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody. See y'all soon.
Thank you, Tammy.
Bye.
Bye.